The sky hung low and the light felt borrowed. I held the folded funeral program like a ticket I could not redeem. The paper had softened at the crease. My thumb had made a faint shine along the edge. Chairs waited in neat rows, but most of them were empty. The names on the little white cards meant nothing to me. My husband's co-workers came in twos and threes, careful with their steps the way people walk in rooms full of glass. One neighbor reached for my elbow and then let his hand fall unsure. I kept my jaw set. I counted breaths so I would not count faces I did not see. From our side, no one arrived. Not my mother with her winter scarf and her opinions. Not my father with his watch that clicked loudly in quiet rooms. Not my sister, who once insisted all flowers look better with a camera pointed at them. Even my best friend stayed elsewhere, as if grief could be RSVP'd and declined. The pastor cleared his throat. A crow shifted on a branch and knocked loose a small clatter of cones that hit the dirt like hollow coins. The casket waited over the open rectangle, brown edges squared and exact. It looked smaller than it had inside the church. The men from the funeral home stood polite and efficient, each with a coat that did not show the wind. The pastor read words about comfort and endurance. I heard them as shapes, not sentences. I thought of a blue thermos that still sat on our kitchen counter, ringed by a faint circle where heat had often lived. I thought of the loose cabinet handle he kept meaning to fix, and how it turned in my fingers this morning, like it wanted to stay undone. My phone was silent in my bag. I had turned off the sound before we drove to the cemetery. I did not trust myself to hear anyone's voice. A shy sun slid out for a moment and lit the brass corners of the casket as if it were blessing hardware. I pressed the program to my chest, then lowered it, then folded it again smaller until it was nothing more than a tight white square against my palm. The straps tightened. The casket began to move almost kindly, as if a careful elevator were taking him where people could not follow. Somewhere behind me a child coughed. A woman's shoe sank and lifted with a soft gasp from wet earth. I kept my eyes on the rectangle until my vision blurred and the edges softened. I did not wipe my face. I let the air do the drying. The phone lit up inside the bag. A faint square of light through the fabric, then another. I ignored it. The casket lowered a few inches more. The light pulsed again and again, brighter now because the clouds had thinned. I opened the bag as if pulling back a curtain. The screen showed one message at the top from my mother. We need to talk. Now. Below it, a column of missed calls stacked like a vertical grave marker. 22. My name and her caller ID would have looked the same as always, and yet here I was, the one standing above the earth. The pastor paused, perhaps sensing the flicker. I turned the phone face down on my lap as if laying a plate over a noise. The men eased the weight lower. Someone sniffed hard behind me. I heard nothing from my own blood. I pictured the other place as if it were happening at this exact hour. Glasses up a chandelier, an arm draped around a waist, a camera catching a ring in the easiest light of late afternoon. I could imagine the scent of sugared buttercream carried by a clean air vent. The phone buzzed again, an insect trapped under glass. I did not move. I watched the rectangle close its mouth on the last of him. The strap loosened with a quiet release. I thought of the morning we bought our first dining chairs and argued gently over whether a fourth one was necessary. I thought of the way he set the table anyway, with a place that stayed empty for a long time and did not complain. The casket settled. The wind returned and lifted the ribbon back into a soft curl. I folded the program one more time until it felt like a small stone. The phone glowed through the bag as if there were a lighthouse inside it, calling ships to a harbor I had already left. When did my family decide celebration was worth more than standing beside me at the edge of the hole? I met him when I was 19 in the corner booth of a campus diner that smelled like old coffee and grilled onions. He wore a shirt with the sleeves rolled just above his elbows, and he kept glancing at a notebook full of numbers as though the page had something to say back. I remember how he pushed his fries across the table when he realized I was too broke to order anything besides a Coke. That small, ordinary kindness stayed with me. We were never dramatic, not the type of couple that filled rooms with noise. Ours was quieter, shared grocery lists, the ritual of folding laundry together, the sound of his shoes dropping by the door at exactly 6 each evening. He brewed coffee too strong, and I watered it down when he wasn't looking. On Sundays, he made pancakes in the shape of uneven hearts. I teased him, but I ate everyone. He was a steady man. He believed in keeping promises, even the ones that seemed unimportant. When the fence needed paint, he did it in July heat without complaint. He carried a blue thermos everywhere, dented from years of slipping out of his truck. He fixed cabinet handles as if he had all the time in the world. These details stitched the years together until they became our fabric. His death did not come the way movies teach you to expect, no long monologue, no grand farewell. It came abruptly in a gasping phone call from a coworker one Wednesday afternoon. He had collapsed in the break room at work, the same place where he had eaten turkey sandwiches and laughed about small office jokes. A heart that had kept time so faithfully simply faltered and quit. I drove to the hospital in a blur, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and lemon polish. A nurse with tired eyes shook her head before I reached the double doors. I stood in a chairless waiting area while she explained terms I couldn't string together. Arrhythmia, failed resuscitation, time of death. My legs gave way, but no one caught me. The days after were a haze of paper and signatures. Death certificates, insurance calls, decisions about caskets I could not picture. I signed my name so many times that I wondered if it belonged to me anymore. I chose hymns he once hummed under his breath without thinking, believing it mattered that his last music should be familiar. I called my parents the night I scheduled the funeral. My mother said, "We'll see what we can do." Her voice clipped as though I'd asked for a favor. My father cleared his throat and added nothing. I hung up, believing they would come. Blood must show up for blood, I told myself. I spent the next mornings in a kitchen that felt larger without his mug on the counter. The refrigerator still hummed, the clock still ticked, but the silence underneath made every sound sharper. I sat at the table with a stack of sympathy cards from his co-workers, strangers to me, until now, who wrote about his kindness in the office, how he always asked about their kids. Their words were warm, handwritten, and careful. No card came from my own family. Not a single one. When I lay down at night, I pressed my face into his side of the pillow. It no longer smelled of him. It smelled of detergent. I whispered things into the fabric that no one else would hear. I tried to picture the next morning without him rising for work, without the squeak of his belt buckle, without the slam of the back door. The emptiness was so complete it felt like another presence. I thought family would fill that emptiness, at least in part. I thought my parents would stand with me, my sister would hold my hand, my best friend would sit on the edge of the bed and say nothing at all, which was all I needed. But the phone stayed silent except for polite condolences from colleagues and neighbors. I sat one night with a candle burning on the table, the flame tilting in the draft from the vent, and I asked myself a question I had never dared before. When had I become someone they could overlook so easily? I grew up in a house where love was rationed, like sugar measured carefully, and always poured heavier into my sister's cup. She was 2 years younger, golden-haired, quick to charm, the kind of child who knew how to tilt her head and make adults melt. My parents adored her openly. I was dependable, the one who remembered birthdays and loaded the dishwasher, but my steadiness seemed invisible beside her sparkle. The pattern began early. On my 16th birthday, I unwrapped a sweater folded neatly in tissue paper while my sister opened a necklace with a tiny diamond pendant. My mother clasped it around her neck and said, "It suits you perfectly." No one looked at me. At Christmas, she received a plane ticket to New York to see a Broadway show while I got socks wrapped in silver paper. My father explained it was practical, something I would use. Practical became my category while she was precious. School events told the same story. When I graduated high school, they arrived, late seats, already filled, slipping in during the last half of my name being read. When my sister performed a single dance recital, they brought flowers big enough to hide her small frame, sitting in the front row, clapping louder than anyone. My best friend at the time, a girl named Karen, leaned close and whispered, "Your sister's lucky." I nodded, though inside I wanted someone to whisper that about me. As we grew older, nothing shifted. Family dinners always circled back to her boyfriends, her jobs, her trips. When I spoke, the conversation drifted elsewhere, like my words dissolved before they reached the table. Even after I married, my mother acted as if my life were a side story, a dull one. She called my husband a nice man but rarely asked about him. My father changed subjects when I mentioned our home projects or the small victories we cherished. Karen, the best friend who once promised loyalty, gravitated toward my sister too. They exchanged texts, met for coffee, shared jokes I wasn't part of. When I discovered photos of them together at a concert, I hadn't been invited to. Something hollow settled in me. I told myself it didn't matter, that friendship had seasons and mine with her had passed. But truthfully, it felt like one more chair pulled away while I was still standing. My husband noticed the imbalance. He was gentle about it, never bitter, but he would shake his head when family gatherings left me pale and quiet. "You deserve better," he'd say, handing me a cup of tea, his hand lingering on my shoulder. He urged me to set boundaries, to expect more. But boundaries felt like doors I wasn't allowed to close. I wanted to believe that if I kept showing up one day, they would see me, not just the outline of someone else's shadow. The years piled on and my role solidified, dependable, invisible, expected but not celebrated. I baked pies for Thanksgiving that no one mentioned. I sent birthday cards with handwritten notes while my sister received surprise parties. I began to wonder if perhaps invisibility was what they wanted from me: steady background, no needs, no spotlight. And yet, standing in that silence after my husband's death, I realized the truth had sharper edges. They didn't just overlook me, they chose to ignore me deliberately, the way someone shuts a curtain against a view they don't want. I held the phone in my hand, waiting for a call that didn't come, and a thought bloomed heavy in my chest. Had I ever been seen as their daughter at all, or only as the supporting character in the story they preferred to tell about themselves? That question lingered heavier than grief, and I carried it into the days that followed, where the absence of my family's presence would speak louder than any condolence ever could. The days leading up to the funeral stretched out like a gray hallway with no doors. Each morning I woke with a start, as if the weight of remembering fell on me like a heavy quilt. I moved slowly through the house, brushing dust from picture frames, ironing black clothes that smelled faintly of starch, checking lists that blurred under my tired eyes. I kept telling myself, just get through the service, just get through it. I called the florist twice, making sure the lilies would arrive on time. I called the church to confirm the organist. I called the funeral home to check the headstone inscription. Each voice on the other end was kind but detached professionals doing their job. When I hung up, the silence was louder than before. The only sound came from the refrigerator's steady hum and the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if the house shifted to remind me I was alone. One night I stood in front of my closet staring at a row of dark dresses. I chose the plainest one, black wool with long sleeves. As I laid it across the bed, I thought of the navy dress I had worn when we attended my cousin's wedding together. He had leaned close during the vows and whispered, "I'd marry you again right now if I could." That dress felt impossible to wear now. The black wool would have to do. I tried to reach my parents again the next day, needing confirmation they would be there. My mother answered on the third ring. Her voice was clipped, efficient. "We'll see," she said, as though attending the funeral of my husband, her son-in-law, was no more urgent than deciding whether to attend a neighborhood potluck. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, waiting for something more. But she only said she was busy, then hung up. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I never finished. The steam rose, then faded, leaving the surface cool and untouched. On the counter, a stack of sympathy cards leaned against the fruit bowl. One was from his boss, who wrote about his steady kindness in the office. Another was from a neighbor I barely knew, saying she would miss waving to him each morning. Their words were simple but sincere, each one a thread trying to stitch up the rip in my life. No card came from my family, no message, no flowers. The next morning, a neighbor knocked on my door. She stood with a casserole dish covered in foil, her hands awkward around the hot glass. She said softly, "I thought you shouldn't cook right now." The smell of baked pasta filled the house in a way that felt almost like care. I thanked her and nearly wept at the sight of something warm set gently on my counter. Late that night, when the house was still, I lit a single lamp in the living room. The yellow glow fell on a corner of the carpet where he used to set down his briefcase. The space was empty now, only a faint indentation left in the fibers. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Around me, the house was quiet. No footsteps, no voice calling from the kitchen, only the faint tick of the clock, steady and merciless. I picked up one of the sympathy cards and traced the ink with my finger. It was from someone who had only known him a year. Yet they took the time to write. My parents had known me my whole life and still nothing. The silence pressed in like another body in the room. My chest ached with a question that felt heavier than grief itself. How can strangers offer more compassion than the people who raised me? The news came to me the way gossip always travels fastest, through glowing screens instead of human voices. I was standing at the sink rinsing the casserole dish my neighbor had brought when my phone chimed. A notification lit the kitchen like a small flare in the dark. I dried my hands and opened it without thinking. The first thing I saw was a photo, my sister's left hand stretched toward the camera, a diamond catching the light like it had been waiting its whole life for this moment. Behind it, blurred but obvious, were glasses of champagne, raised high, mouths open in celebration. The caption read, "Finally, the day we've all been waiting for. Engagement party tomorrow night. Come celebrate love." I stared until the water running from the tap grew cold. The date at the bottom of the post stopped me. The party was scheduled for the same day and time as the funeral, my husband's funeral. My phone buzzed again, another alert. More photos, her smiling in a white dress that wasn't quite bridal but carried the suggestion, her fiancé's arm around her waist, my parents flanking them with broad smiles. My best friend, once my best friend, stood at the edge of the group holding a glass, leaning toward my sister like she belonged there. Everyone I had hoped to see at the graveside tomorrow was already accounted for in that photograph, lit by chandelier light surrounded by laughter. I tried calling my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with background noise, music, clinking glasses, bursts of laughter. "Yes," she said, not unkindly, but distracted, as though her attention was already divided. "Mom, the funeral is tomorrow," I reminded her, though she knew. A pause, then a sigh. "Honey, life has to go on. People need something joyful to hold on to. It's been such a hard year. Your sister's engagement, well, it's a blessing. You'll understand one day." I gripped the edge of the counter so hard the laminate pressed lines into my skin. "So you won't be there?" I asked. "I can't be in two places at once," she replied, her tone light, almost dismissive. "We'll come by later, maybe next week, to pay our respects." In the background, I heard someone call for a toast. The laughter swelled, drowning out the rest of her words. I ended the call without saying goodbye. The house seemed to exhale into silence. I walked to the fridge and saw the lilies I had bought for the service resting in a vase, their white petals beginning to curl at the edges. They smelled faintly sweet, a little sour where the water had grown cloudy. I thought of the roses I had glimpsed in the photos, fresh and full, draped across tables where music played and glasses clinked. I touched one of the lilies, its petal thin as paper, and a drop of water slid down the stem onto my finger. The contrast struck me so sharply it felt like cruelty. My flowers already wilting in the stillness, theirs fresh in the noise of celebration. I sat down at the table, staring at the phone, face up, the glow fading as the screen dimmed. My reflection looked back at me in the black glass. Around me, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of a truth I could no longer deny: the people who should have stood with me tomorrow had already chosen where to stand. The morning of the funeral began before the sun. I woke to the sound of rain ticking against the window, the kind that blurs the outlines of everything it touches. I lay still for a moment, listening, hoping foolishly that it would stop, that the sky would grant me at least one mercy. It didn't. The steady patter continued, soft but unrelenting, like fingers drumming on glass. I dressed slowly, pulling the black wool dress over my head, smoothing the fabric down my sides. The air felt damp, and the hem clung to my legs as I moved. I pinned my hair back, not because anyone would notice, but because I wanted to look like I had tried. I slid his wedding ring onto a chain around my neck. The metal was cool against my skin, a small anchor. When I stepped outside, the driveway was empty. No cars I recognized, no headlights waiting, no family pulling in late with excuses. Only the funeral home sedan idled at the curb, its wipers cutting back and forth like metronomes keeping time for grief. The driver opened the door for me, his face solemn and kind, but he did not speak. The church was filled with strangers, my husband's co-workers in dark suits, a few neighbors, the pastor already waiting at the pulpit. They greeted me with hushed voices and gentle hands on my arm. He was a good man, one said. Another told me how he always shared his lunch if someone forgot theirs. Their words were sincere, but each one scraped against the absence of those I longed to see. When the service ended, we followed the hearse to the cemetery. The ground was soft from rain, the grass heavy underfoot. Folding chairs lined the gravesite, neat rows of gray fabric under a canopy. I sat in the front, my hands knotted in my lap, the folded program pressed flat between my palms. Behind me, people murmured. The pastor began to speak again, words about faith and endurance, about how love outlasts death. But all I heard was the question whispered in my head. Where is my family? Every few minutes, someone leaned close to ask gently, "Will your parents be arriving soon?" I smiled tightly, shook my head, said nothing more. The shame burned hotter than the grief itself, as though I needed to apologize for being abandoned. The casket waited above the open grave, rain collecting in beads along the polished wood. I thought of how he used to wipe the kitchen table in slow circles, making sure no streaks remained, and I imagined him brushing the raindrops away with the same steady patience. The straps tightened, and the box began to descend. My throat closed. That was when the phone lit up. The first vibration startled me, a sharp reminder of the world beyond this place. I ignored it, keeping my eyes fixed on the pastor's lips. Then it buzzed again and again, until the sound felt indecent against the solemn hush. I pulled it from my bag, intending to silence it. On the screen glared a message from my mother. "We need to talk. Now." Below it, the list of missed calls scrolled down, 22 in total, stacked like a column of demands. My hand trembled. Around me, chairs creaked, a cough echoed, the rain tapped the canopy, but all I could see was that screen glowing cold in my lap as the casket lowered inch by inch into the earth. I turned the phone face down on my thigh, pressing it flat as if I could smother the noise. But the buzzing continued, insistent, a living thing clawing for attention. It seemed obscene, this chorus of rings, while the man who had loved me without condition was being returned to the ground. I gripped the folded program until the paper bent into ridges against my palm. The sound of dirt hitting the lid echoed faintly. I did not cry. I sat perfectly still, a statue carved out of betrayal and rain. And in that stillness, one thought rose sharper than all the rest. They had not come to stand beside me, but they would not stop calling, as though their absence needed no explanation, only more of my attention. After the last prayer was spoken and the crowd thinned, I stayed seated beneath the gray canopy, watching the rain gather in small pools along the edges of the folding chairs. My hands were stiff, the program damp from my grip. I waited until the cemetery workers began pulling ropes back, their movements quiet, efficient, as though they'd learned to carry sorrow without letting it weigh them down. I climbed into my car, the interior smelling faintly of damp fabric and the vanilla air freshener he had insisted on buying last spring. The silence inside pressed against me. The phone on the passenger seat lit up again, its glow insistent in the fading light. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, then I pressed the button and called back. My mother answered on the first ring. Finally, she said, her voice sharp, breathless. "I've been trying to reach you all day." I sat there gripping the steering wheel, the leather cold under my palms. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice cracked but held steady enough. A pause, then a sigh heavy with irritation. "Sweetheart, your sister's engagement party was today. We couldn't miss it. Everyone was counting on us. You'll understand someday when you're not in the middle of all this." The words landed like blows. "My husband was lowered into the ground today and you were toasting champagne." Her tone hardened. "Don't make this about you. We'll pay our respects later. Right now there are more pressing matters. We need to talk about the will, about what he might have left behind. Did he name you beneficiary? Do you know if there are assets tied to the house?" The phone shook in my hand. It wasn't guilt that had driven her to call again and again. It was greed, urgency about paperwork and possessions, not about the man whose body now rested under wet soil. Something inside me snapped. "You buried me today too," I said quietly. "You made your choice. Don't call me again." Before she could answer, I ended the call. The screen went black, reflecting only my own face in the glass. I picked up the folded program from my lap, tore it down the middle with a slow, deliberate motion, and let the pieces fall onto the passenger seat. They landed like pale feathers, silent and final. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. I started the engine and drove away from the cemetery, away from the life that had taught me to expect nothing, away from the people who had proven they had nothing to give. In the weeks that followed, I cut the ties clean. I blocked my parents' numbers, muted the family group chat, stopped checking for messages that had never held comfort anyway. The house was quiet, but it was my quiet now, not theirs. Neighbors came with casseroles with loaves of bread, with quiet offers to mow the lawn or fix the gutters. My husband's colleagues dropped by to share stories, little fragments of him I hadn't known: how he whistled in the break room, how he kept spare pens for anyone who needed them, how he never complained about late shifts. Their kindness wrapped around me in ways blood never had. I began to build new rituals. Each evening I lit a candle on the kitchen table and watched the flame steady itself, a reminder that light can exist even in silence. On Sundays I made pancakes in uneven hearts, not because anyone expected them, but because I wanted to taste memory without drowning in it. Sometimes I walked by the river at dusk, listening to the water move, feeling small but not invisible. I joined a support group for widows, sitting in a circle of folding chairs where every story was heavy but shared. We spoke about absence, about bills, about the ache of setting one plate instead of two. I found a strange relief in those rooms, proof that survival was not solitary, that dignity could be rebuilt. Slowly, I understood a truth that had hidden in plain sight all my life. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. Family is chosen in actions, not inherited in names. My parents chose my sister's glitter over my grief. My best friend chose champagne over compassion. Their absence was loud, but my own presence was louder. I kept one funeral program intact, pressed between the pages of a book he once loved, not as a wound, but as proof. Proof that I had stood at the edge of loss and still chosen to remain standing. Sometimes I walk past the cemetery, pausing at the gate. The grass has grown back where the earth was turned. The sky feels wider there, and I whisper words into the air that belong only to him. And each time I carry home the same lesson: you cannot force people to stand beside you at the grave. But you can choose who walks with you afterward. So I chose peace. I chose dignity. I chose to stop begging for crumbs of love and start making room at my table for those who had already shown up unasked, with open hands. And in that quiet I found myself again.